Yes, we finally finished the game. It seemed impossible because of all of the crazy scenes that I told you before, but we managed to finish it. So it was launch day, and
It wasn't
yeah,
recording.
no problem, no problem. I repeat this part.
No. I mean, it wasn't recording at all. Everything is lost. We have nothing. We have to start again.
What? We've been recording for months. I told you all the process of development, and you want me to start again because you weren't recording.
Well, do you have anything better to do?
To check. Okay, I'll start again. This is the story of how a small joke became the most famous game of all times. Probably. Like most important things in life, this came when I least expected it. But first, let me give you some context. Who I am and how I got here. I had big plans, you know. I studied computer science, worked for years in a painfully boring office job, then learned video game development, and eventually I left that job, hoping to find a position as a programmer or game designer at a game studio. However, the industry had other plans for me and for everyone. Since no opportunities came my way, I had no choice but to start my own projects and small games to improve my portfolio and increase my chances of getting hired. It was frustrating, but it had to be done. Then, one random day, on an ordinary morning, someone sent me a tweet from a Spanish publisher called Handusoft. They were organizing an event to showcase the games under their label, and they were looking for press or content creators to cover it. At the time, I was very famous in YouTube, you know, with almost 100 subscribers. So they gave me a press pass. I went to the event intending to film a video, interviewing developers, and hopefully slip a resume or two while I was at it. However, another, far more powerful idea completely took over my mind. The developers at the event were part of very small studios, just 2 or 3 people. And yet they were releasing their games on Xbox and PlayStation. Some of them even said they made enough money to live off it. I don't know if it was the exhaustion from the trip, the pollution in Madrid, or the fact that I had finally found my path. But at that moment, my brain decided it was time to completely change my strategy. Enough with small games just to learn or have more things to show off. It was time to make something more ambitious. A well-thought, polished game with real chances of being published. Exhausted after spending the whole day running around, I got another 5-hour bus right back home that same night. I collapsed on the couch and scrolled through social media, and I saw that while I'd been away, the global game jam had taken place, and the theme for this year had been Make Me Laugh. As I was dozing off, closing my eyes, I began fantasizing about what kind of game I would have made for that jam, until I finally drifted off to sleep. Or so I thought. Suddenly, an idea hit me. An idea that is now my everyday life. I'm going to make a video game of a joke. There are many ways to name a video game. You can base it on the plot, the mechanics, or the genre. But I like to do the exact opposite. Define the plot and the mechanics based on the game's name. And if I wanted the game to be a universal joke, it had to be something that everyone would recognize. So that's why I knew since the very beginning that the game would be called Why Did the Chicken Cross the Road? With that, 80% of the game was already done. Now I just had to spend several years to make the other 20%. No, but seriously, I had it crystal clear. I didn't know the plot or the specific mechanics, but I knew it was going to be a roguelike shooter like Nuclear Throne or Enter the Gungeon. And I also knew that each ending of the game would be an answer to the question, why did the chicken cross the road? From there, it was time to figure things out. Many people think that coming up with the idea is the hardest part, but the world is full of ideas. Spend an afternoon brainstorming and you can come up with 20 game ideas that could easily work. But shaping that into something concrete with mechanics, deciding how you'll present the story to the player, Figuring out what every button on the controller will do, that's the real challenge now. At this point, I had two options: move away from the references I mentioned or embrace that inspiration. It was a difficult moment because if you try to look too much like the great references of the genre, you will be compared, and it's very likely that you will lose out. However, if you are too innovative, it's likely that the proposal will not be understood, especially for a very serious video game. So I came to the conclusion that I will do a bit of both. I would be conservative in mimicking the mechanics that work in these games, and I would be innovative in combining those mechanics and making them work in my game universe. The plan was as follows. I was clear that the core gameplay and game feel of the game had to be that of Nuclear Throne and Enter the Gungeon. These are games that, simply because of how fun it is to shoot, they get you hooked and play one game after another. In addition, Nuclear Throne had already opened the door to giving a gun to a fish. Why not a chicken? From The Binding of Isaac, I wanted its system of upgrades and synergies. In short, being able to build your own attacks based on chance and your own decisions. One of the most fun and frustrating things is to be doing a really good run and suddenly pick up an item that increases your power a lot or ends up killing you because it's too chaotic. And speaking of chaos, that is exactly what I wanted from Vampire Survivors. The feeling of power that's come from shooting thousands of bullets and annihilating your enemies instantly is pure adrenaline, and greatly rewards the player who knows how to play and maximize their options. I wanted to get a little closer to bullet hell, and this was a very good reference. They are all very good ingredients, but the truth is that it is easier said than done. I wanted a game that was based on Nuclear Throne. In other words, I had to make Nuclear Throne before making my game. Funny, isn't it? But not only that, because even though I love The Binding of Isaac, it has always bothered me that there are combinations of items that simply don't work because they are incompatible. I wanted to avoid that at all costs, so now I also had to fix The Binding of Isaac. Well, simple for a first project. I just had to recreate a classic of the genre and improve the most famous roguelike in the world. But hey, they were problems for the future, we are still on paper. With this clear, it was time to mix it up and make it my own. I decided that, unlike in The Binding of Isaac, the improvements would not be applied to the character, but rather it would be the weapon that will evolve. This way, you could have several weapons with different synergies and add an extra layer of strategy. It would not only consist of choosing an upgrade or leaving it, but you have the option of putting it in one weapon or another. Although my idea has always been to have different characters, each one with unique abilities, I do find interesting that the weapon is more of a protagonist, as it happens in Enter the Gungeon. And the possibility of being able to change weapons also allowed me as a developer to make more interesting enemies, to force the player to have different type of weapon that can be used in different situations. As a good roguelike, it will obviously have procedurally generated scenarios and a boss at the end of each area. That was very clear. And something bad for the chickens but good for me as a developer is that they have many predators, so the number of enemies that can be made is quite large. It's very funny to see how, with a good gun, the chicken is able to face these threats and be the danger itself. I don't know if it hasn't been made clear, but the game story is an excuse to put in all the crazy things that come to mind, starting with the very famous communist chicken. Anyway, although there were many aspects of the games that were up in the air and had to be tested, there was a clear vision. Make an absolutely fun game. The references were also clear. I knew where they were falling and where I could polish their successes. And I had all the time in the world. 2024 had just started and I would take this project as calmly as possible, without rushing to show it to the public until I feel comfortable with it. Well, no, it wasn't like that either. Like I said before, life comes and doesn't catch you if you're okay with it. Suddenly, I was forced to have a playable demo in less than 3 months. Did I achieve it? I was really calm. Since I wasn't in a hurry, I signed up for a pixel art course to make my own sprites. Not with the intention of making them the final arts. I mean, look at this. but so at least they would be useful for building my prototypes and building mechanics. Well, it turned out that this year a new video game fair was opening near my city, Guadalindi, and they were looking for studios that would like to set up a booth to show their video game to the public and professionals. And there will also be investors and publishers there to talk to. It was crazy, because there were less than 3 months left until the fair and I had this mess and some sketches in a notebook. But that's how I am. It was the perfect opportunity to test my ideas with other people and see if it worked as well as I thought it would. So, once again, a complete chain of plans. No chill, no nothing. Cruising speed and rushing until the last day. The problem was that I didn't have time to do my art test anymore. I needed someone who really knew how to make the game's sprites. And the music, very important. I needed at least a couple of songs for the games. And I didn't even have a logo. If I wanted the game to have an impact, I needed to give it a professional and brand image. So I looked for the most capable people to carry out this titanic task and form a team of super developers. The problem obviously was time. In 3 months it is very difficult to have something playable, and even less something to show to the general public and take to such a big event. In other words, it was time to cut back. It was impossible to bring all the ideas I had in my head to reality, so I had to make a decision. What did I want to show? Well, since I couldn't show what my game is like, I wanted to show the potential it has. So I decided to focus on 2 aspects, the game feel and the weapon upgrades. After the first meetings and deliveries from the artist, the game was like this. We only had the basic sprites for the chicken and enemies and a kind of programming base to change the type of shot. There were 2 months left until the fair. It's true that there was still a lot of work to do, but at least the character designs were perfect. If you want me to show you the design process in another video, put it in the comments below, because it's hilarious to see the material I gave her as ideas and then what she ended up doing. Remember that my first chicken was this monstrosity. At this point I didn't really care much about the visuals, so I focused on programming to the death. The truth is that they were very hard months, spending hours in front of the screen, trying to get the right number of bullets at the right speed, having the tools to be able to modify these numbers easily, making each shot feel good. Half the time I was programming and the other half playing Nuclear Throne to see how the professionals do it. In fact, on the now defunct social network Twitter, one of the founders of Blambir, the studio that made Nuclear Throne itself, saw a clip of my game and liked it. At this point, I should have retired on a high note, but for some reason I decided to continue. The truth is that I spent weeks on this, and the deadline was approaching. It was one of the pillars of the game. I couldn't settle for just anything, but at the same time, I had a billion other things to do. A game isn't a game if it doesn't have objectives. I needed something to shoot at it. We had the initial enemies clear. On one hand, we will have the Weasel as the basic enemy and the Possum as the boss of the area. One type of enemy was not enough, so we decided to include this Muscle Man with the idea that he will be the classic tank enemy. There is still a lack of variety, but we had to go with this or we wouldn't have time. I have to admit that both the artist and the musician did the job absolutely well and quickly, while I continued to fight with the enemy AI. Again, I'm not going to go into much detail here to save topics for future videos, but I got something quite elegant and scalable. At this point, there were several open fronts. A scenario had to be made, and the game feel and AI had to be further polished. So while the artist was busy creating the elements that would later form the scenario, I continued programming like crazy. Here arose a problem and an opportunity. While testing weapons, I saw that it was very fun when you fired a lot of bullets. It was the perfect opportunity for the player to reach this level of madness similar to a bullet hell in the playable demo. Obviously, the price was not cheap. The code and physics of Unity had to be redone so that the shots and bullets were as efficient as possible. Although for security reasons it is limited to a maximum of 500 bullets and a time on screen, the truth is that it held perfectly even with 2000 bullets. Mega for me, it's amazing and a weapon that had to be used to stand out. I think it was at this point, with about a month to go until the event, that we got official confirmation that our application had been accepted and that we will have a booth to showcase our game. Oh, didn't I say that? We didn't even know if we were going to be there. We could have been beaten and our game not choosing in the end. But we took the risk and it worked out. There was no turning back now. Well, there never really was. While Vic was busy making logos, sky art, designing the banner we would have at the fair, I was finally able to put together a complete level, with its enemies, its weapons, upgrade points, its beginning and its end. As there was still time, I decided to leave the boss programming for later, and focus on the small but essential details to make the game complete. As I said, two aspects had to be strength: the game feel and the weapon upgrade system. The problem is that in such a short demo there was no time to simulate a realistic progression of a finished game, so we decided to go to the most attractive. The mechanics were as follows. With one trigger, you fire one type of shot, with the other trigger, you fire the other type of shot, and by killing a certain number of enemies, you could enter a mode in which the two shots were combined. We call this go into ecstasy. This way, you could have a machine gun in one shot, a grenade launcher in another, and when you go into ecstasy, you will have a machine gun of grenades. The idea was good, it was spectacular to look and very enjoyable. The problem here was the UI. It is the hardest thing to do in a video game by far. So I'm going to ignore everything that refers to this topic until I am in a more stable mental health. It was not the game's strong point, clearly. In the end, we opted for a simplification of the system. Although in the final game we wanted the improvement to be gradual, for the demo you will have a single modifier in each shot and an extra one that will only be activated when you go into ecstasy. New problem. Since it is something relatively new and innovative, you need to explain it to the player. In other words, it was time to design a tutorial. Okay. I'm the Master Oka of the future, who is editing this. I'm giving you a lot of talk and I'm summarizing as much as possible, but the core of the game was actually built in these 3 months. So there's a lot of content and a lot of things to talk about. To rest a bit, during this month we also adopted a kitten. As cute as stupid, so he fits pretty well. Also, we discovered a few later that he was totally deaf. The good thing is that we can change his name as many times as we want because he won't notice. His name of this week is Draculino, so... Okay, let's continue with the game then. What does a tutorial need? Give you information. And how does it give you the information? Well, mostly with tests and dialogue. I didn't have much room to try things out either, so I went to a classic tutorial where a character tells you what to do. In my defense, I was totally out of my mind at this point, stressed out and seeing how the deadline was approaching. So my way of letting off steam was through the tutorial dialogues, but they had the worst, most unfunny and simple jokes you can imagine. But anyway, to sum it up, everything was done. The tutorial worked, the level worked, it had no apparent bugs and it was quite enjoyable. We were ready and we still had 3 or 4 days left before going to the event. 2 things were added at the last time. At the marketing level, some cards with the characters were made to give away to the people who tried the game. Pretty cute if it weren't for the printing error that left all the characters with the definition of the PlayStation 1. 200 cards and all grown. But that's what there wasn't time to get more. On the other hand, at the game field level, the shells for the bullet drop every time you shoot. This is a detail that improves the game feel a lot, but it's also a good indicator for the player to know where they are already gone. Also, when they go crazy and see the whole floor full of bullets, it's really cool. Now we are ready. The next day we are going to Guadalindi and may it be what God wants. Ooh, shit! I didn't program that boss in the end, did I? Okay. So again, we have a problem and an opportunity. The problem is clearly that there is a boss missing here. It would be the perfect ending to the demo. But it was totally impossible to do something up to par in such a short time. However, the boss design and animation we had were really cool, so it would be a shame if it weren't included. I took a chance. I made the end of the demo consist of showing the final boss, setting up an epic fight in front of you, and just when it was about to start, BAM! End of demo. It's risky because it can leave the player with a cool feeling, but it can also leave the player wanting more, like a post-credit scene in a Marvel movie. Really, I wanted the player to imagine that epic fight instead of programming it myself. Well, let's see if it works. We were a little nervous because even though what we had was solid, you never know how the player who faces the game for the first time will react. It was also the first event of this kind that we went to, both as developers and as audience. It had taken us a lot of effort to get here. It had been really hard and we didn't know if it was going to be worth it. So we agreed that it would be the last event we will go until we found a publisher to finance the project. That was largely the goal of the trip. I had a lot of meetings with national and international publishers to show them the game and find a way to finance it. Because, look, the only ones who were losing money here were Vic and I. Not only because we didn't make money making the game, but we also had to pay the artist and the musician, as well as the printing of the cards and the stand on the fair. Out of our own pockets. It's not something that's sustainable in the long term, and we were very clear about that. That's why this opportunity was unique. And the truth is that the meetings went well. I made a pretty well-crafted pitch on a website explaining the need for the game, the gap we saw in the market, everything very professional. There were big names interested in the game and the money we were asking for suited them. As you can imagine, I was freaking out. I thought that the dream was closer than ever to becoming a reality. Have they answered any of your emails? Me neither. We will talk about the financing issue another time. Don't worry, my chicks. But let's move on to the other point. The reception of the people, the public, the audience, the gamers. We knew that the game had a big problem, and that was the clarity of the interface when upgrading a weapon. This was repeated to us over and over again, and sometimes we had to approach the player to remind them how certain elements worked. A serious problem in any game, but since it's a prototype, it's not that big of a deal. These kind of things evolve and change 1,000 times before the final product comes out, so we had some room. What we really wanted to test were the mechanics and the game feel. We were going to put in front of people a game that lacked a lot of content. It had no variety of enemies, no options, it only had 2 songs, 1 stage, 1 playable character. We were betting everything on feelings. The reception from the people was incredible. Not in my wildest dreams would I have expected such positive feedback. We gave people who finished the demo a little form to rate different aspects of the games, and on average they gave us a high mark in the game field section. Those people told us it reminded them of Enter the Gungeon, and yet they gave us such a good mark. This is crazy. We are 4 random people who have put together several parts and have come with something very enjoyable. And being compared to one of the most famous games on the indie scene with millions of dollars invested is terrifying, but cool. The thing is that we didn't have anything else. People asked us when the game would be released and we hadn't even opened the Steam page. At these type of events, studios take advantage to win wish lists and inflate numbers. but we didn't even have time to make the page because we were against the clock to have something playable. Despite all that, receiving such good and positive feedback is really exciting. And as for the end of the demo, people really enjoyed it. It was fun to see them get to the final area, see the boss, get ready, do next stretches, and when they were ready to go in shooting, the demo ended up in their faces. Obviously, they all wanted to do that fight, but having it presented like that left them really wanting to keep playing and get interested in the game. It was the perfect ending with the resources we had. So far, so good, much better than we could have expected. The surprise came when another of the points that we were most appreciated was the humor. Do you remember that tutorial I did against the clock, reading the script as I went along? Well, people loved the dialogue, loved the joke, and they loved the communist chicken. They immediately accepted the absurdity of the plot and enjoyed seeing what the next nonsense or pun would be. That was an incredible relief to me because it gives me the freedom to not have to be tied down to doing any realistic story. I can come up with the most bizarre excuse to give a gun to a chicken. All of this was what made me realize that I had something really big in my hands. It was a fun, nice game that made people laugh and that had a very high quality for having been made in such a short time. Obviously, it had its flaws, but we knew where most of them came from and we knew how to fix them. It's true that we didn't have funding, and from what we discovered a month later, we are not going to have it in the near future. But maybe it was worth continuing to fight for this game on our own. So we broke our promise and decided to go months later to the biggest indie video game event in Spain, with a new demo and new ideas. But I'll tell you about that in the next video. If you like the video, give it all the love you can, and if you like the game, you can add it to your wishlist on Steam and follow us on social networks. All of them we are Wateke Games. That's all. I'm Master Oka, and that's been the first devlog of Why Did the Chicken Cross the Road.